All right, we are back. We are COMP397 in the fall 2018 semester at Centennial. Web game programming. We are week 3, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to be handling preloading assets in Create.js and creating a GameObject SuperClass that works for us so we can make start off of our example that I'm going to be using in this course. Right? In the second part, I'm hoping to make a finite state machine this week. That's what I want to try and make. Talk about finite state machine pattern, design pattern, which is a little earlier than normal. But I want to try and get it to as fast as possible because without it, what's going to end up happening is making more than one screen is going to be very challenging. All right, so we're running off of a project that we started last week. So for those people who are new, Gabriel, then you can download the project, which is COMP397 in the fall 2018 semester, lesson 1. I'm just continuing with that project this time. So if you look online, this is up on GitHub. So I'm kind of doing a little bit different this time. I'm going to try and do it differently every single time. All right, so this is the project, lesson 1, it says, right? And I'm going to go lesson 2 and lesson 3 later on, but I'm going to start with this one, but I'm going to create another shell. So I'm going to kind of duplicate this one into another project. So here's COMP397 lesson 1, and I'm going to make this lesson 2. So just wait a second while I do this. Paste. And lesson 2 is going to be like lesson 1, but I want to keep lesson 1 separate because there's some things about lesson 1 that we can look at and compare, and that's why I'm kind of making lesson 2. I could also make a separate branch, but I'm not going to talk about branching in this course. So lesson 2. And as always, we're using Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have Visual Studio Code, Gabriel, then get it, right? We're not going to use Visual Studio at all or anything like that. We're using the lightweight Visual Studio Code editor in this course. All right, so here I've downloaded and installed Visual Studio Code from last couple weeks, and we just dragged and dropped our lesson 2, which is this thing. I have a couple things to change. One is my package.json file. So whenever I rename a lesson or thing, we're into lesson 3 actually. It's not, should not be lesson 2. Hold on a second. Let me just fix that problem that I just created. Sorry.
Did we not have it set up to do lights over?
I'm going to do that, yeah.
I thought we already had it set up.
No, it's already set up. So when you do it, you there we go. Okay, so there's lesson 3. Sorry, it's not lesson 2. Lesson 2 is kind of using lesson 1's content. All right, so we have lesson 2 and lesson 3, and we just changed the name of the package.json to lesson 3. This also needs to change. This is for completeness. I don't really need to do this. So my package.json file, like I talked about last time, I'm just going to turn the lights off here. So you guys can see properly too. This package.json is basically my manifest for the entire project. Okay, that's what this thing does. I have my name and stuff on it, but you can have your own. So I've done this. Now, I also have, by default, in Windows, a hidden .git folder. So whenever I start a project, or if you download mine, then inside there's this hidden .git folder where your Git stuff resides. This is it right here. Typically, what I would do is delete this one and start over. But it's my it's my project, it's me, so I can keep it actually and continue, right? The only thing is that it's going to be called lesson 3 as opposed to lesson 1. That's the only difference. So that's a thing that's going to change. That's one. I also have the same remote. The remote is the same, and that has to change. So I'm going to go back into my project, and I'm going to press Control and backtick, which it's going to bring up my integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code. Right? So integrated terminal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Git remote. And this is going to list my origin remote, which points to my last project on GitHub, which I don't want. I want to point to a new project on GitHub. So I'm going to say git remote remove. I believe I can do that. And it's called origin. Gets rid of it. So if I do a git remote, then I can see that there's no remote anymore. And I can get this information, the remote information, from my new repository that I'm going to make up on GitHub. So I'm going to go back to GitHub. And I'm going to make a new repository. I'm going to call this the new name, so COMP COMP397 and then dash F2018 lesson 3. I don't know why it gave me that error. That's fine. And then I'm going to take these last 2 lines of code, these ones here. Actually, just this one for now, because I need to make a new commit. And right-click. Oh, not this one. This one here. I got the wrong one. This one, which is basically setting up my remote again. Okay, so I need to set up a new remote, which is pointing to my new repository on GitHub. That's what it does. Okay. I also need to do git add dot because I changed my package.json file. Add dot, and then git commit -m, and then I switched to lesson 3 project. And then git push origin master, which pushes my changes up to the new remote, which is on lesson 3. Okay, but it also keeps all my other commits. All right, so if I go back to this is lesson 3 now, and if I refresh, you can see that I have my new project there. Okay, so this is the one that I'm following through. So for Gabriel, as an example, I recommend downloading this one to follow along with me. Okay, so you don't have to do a new one. Like we did last time, from a testing perspective, what I always like to do is, at least recently, is I like to use light server, and I also like to use automatic transpiling with TypeScript. We're using TypeScript in this course. We're transpiling from TypeScript to JavaScript. TypeScript makes JavaScript easier. It wraps JavaScript with object-oriented syntax, if you will, and syntactic sugar. And in order for me to transpile automatically, I need to press Control-Shift-B. So Control-Shift-B. Sorry? Right, Shift-B. There's other ways, and you can use this watch task. There's 2 tasks you can kick off with TypeScript. One is a build task. The other one's a watch task. If I click the watch task, what it does is it watches for any changes to my script, and then automatically transpiles from TypeScript to JavaScript, because the browsers only read JavaScript, not TypeScript. Okay, that's what it does. Okay, cool. So I did that part. And then I'm going to kick off another PowerShell right here. And this is where I'm going to do light server. And in order for you to use this, Gabriel, you have to have Node installed. There's a whole installation process over the last 2 weeks. I covered that. So if you look back at the last couple of weeks, or maybe John or Gerardo later on can help you out. Maybe not today. And when I use light server, what it does is it creates a link to my Chrome, and it shows me this. But there's a button missing. This is the problem I had. Unless I press refresh like this, my button doesn't show up. And it doesn't show up and gives me this error because of blobs. I guess that's the best way of saying it. Blobs. It's a blob problem. It's actually a loading problem. So I'm going back to my code, right? One problem we had last week was, well, we created inside our objects library, we created 2 new objects. One of them was label.ts. And again, when I say objects library, it's just an objects module that includes 2 classes, the label class and the button class. Okay, so I mean, you may not be familiar looking at this as JavaScript, but this is TypeScript. So it looks more object-oriented with different syntax than the traditional JavaScript classes. All right, so again, so if you notice my button class, it's nice, but then what I'm trying to do inside the constructor method is I'm trying to measure the size of my bitmap before my constructor's been finished, basically. And what this does is it's a bit of a bug. It creates this thing where if it's cached, and which it would be if I refresh my browser, everything is good, right? But if it's not cached and you're loading your bitmap or your button for the first time, it's going to give you an error. We can't live with that. We have to have it so it's always cached. And the way to cache it is to do something called preloading. So we do have 4 libraries in the CreateJS suite of libraries that we're using, right? So if I go back up to here and I look at CreateJS, because that's the suite of libraries we're using to build our game engine this semester. And again, what I want you guys to use is anything I give you for code, you're free to use as part of your game engine. And then you can modify it and build from there. Please don't try and make your own stuff for the game engine piece, because what's going to happen is you're going to have questions and I can answer some of them, but if it's completely your own game engine, something totally different, it's gonna be a problem. You can certainly build off mine. So anything you add on top of mine, it's okay. But one thing you cannot use in this course is you cannot use Phaser. You cannot use another game engine for a JavaScript game engine. Can't do those kind of things. You can include physics. If you want to include a physics engine, you can. That's crazy. For most people, they'll say no. I don't recommend that. That's like, course suicide. GPA suicide is what I used to call it, right? To do your, because it's very hard to do for the average programmer. So that's something I don't recommend. But CreateJS is a suite of 4 libraries. It comes with Easel.js, like I said last week, Tween.js, which helps us animate and do other kind of movements on the screen, Sound.js, which enables sounds, and this one's what we're going to use this week, which is called Preload, which allows us to preload images and sounds and other things. All right, so how the heck does preload work? Well, if I look at my core script, let's go back to my core game.ts file. So I'm going to just close off this one. And in my game.ts file right now, I have a reference to the canvas element on in the index.html file. I have a reference to my stage, and I talked about what that is, a layer on top of my canvas, my HTML5 canvas. And the only thing we have in my index.html right now is this one canvas element and a bunch of scripts. That's all we have, right? So the canvas element is where the game lives. This is where I'm going to fire up my game, where the game is happening right now. And I make a reference to that. Again, this is just review. I make a reference to that inside of my game.ts file. All right, so I have my canvas and then my stage. My stage is a logical container that is created by using CreateJS library, and we pass a reference to the canvas into the stage. Okay, this is great, but guess what? We need to do something before we do all this work. We need to preload all my assets before we start my hit the start method. I need another method, and I'm going to call it init. I'm going to make a new function. I'm going to call this function init. It's going to return void. So the way you return stuff in TypeScript is just colon and what it returns, void. Okay. Notice it's kind of grayed out. It's grayed out because it's never been called. That's what it does, right? And we need some documentation. So if I go back to my CreateJS docs, if I click on Preload.js, and if I look at docs for Preload.js, what you see is the preload module and some example code, which is almost exactly what we're going to be using for now. So it has something called a load queue. And the load queue, think about it as almost like a group of assets. That's what we want to have. So the load queue holds all the assets that we want to use in our game in the cache of the browser. That's what it does, right? And it happens before we start our stage and our canvas and all that stuff. It's the first thing that we would be doing, okay? We're also going to create an event, right? This event, which is going to be when all the assets finish loading, we're going to wait for the assets to be finished loading, and then we're going to call, instead of handle complete, we're going to call the start method, which we already defined. So the start method is still going to be fired or triggered, but we're going to do this other stuff first, this other little dance, okay? So what are we going to call our load queue? We're going to call it kind of like our assets, right? Or asset manager, if you will. So I'm going to say, let asset manager be of type CreateJS dot load queue. Okay, so that's the load queue. That's the first thing we're going to do. But here's a challenge, right? Every time we use the asset manager, I'm going to have to pass a reference to the asset manager to every class that uses assets. Remember that my asset manager right now is locked inside of my game.ts file. I have to get a reference to it. And the one way I can do it is I can always pass it from one file to another, like a baton in a race, right? But that gets really cumbersome. And what we've been doing so far is I've created a singleton-like pattern where I create a reference, like a global variable, that I can have a reference to, so I can access some files anywhere in the program. And the way I did that was I'm going to make this, or so far I don't have this, but I want to make this idea as part of a managers folder, which I don't have yet, okay? Because think about this. I have an asset manager, and if I had to pass a reference to asset manager in every constructor of every object down the line, because it's going to access the asset somehow, right? That's a real pain. So in my scripts, I'm going to make, just to prepare for this, I'm going to make a new folder. So a new folder, and I'm going to call this the managers folder. Here's my managers folder. So so far I have core and I have objects. Now I'm making a new folder called managers. I might have a bullet manager, a manager to manage all my bullets on my screen. It's going to have a bullet pool. I'm going to have a collision manager to make sure that how all my objects collide, right, in my screen, in my game. And now I'm going to have an asset manager, right? But what I really want more than anything else right now is a game manager that manages my entire game, almost a place where I can store all of my static objects that I can access from anywhere in the game, from any class, okay? So in my managers, I'm going to make a brand new file. I'm going to call this the game manager, so game.ts. It's different than the game.ts that exists in core. So it says, so the way you would read this is the core game, right? The game manager, right? As an example, game manager or the game core, whatever you want to call it, right? So game.ts is going to be in a new module. So I'm going to use the module pattern. So I'm going to say module. That's the way we separate modules in Create.js, right? And I'm going to name it managers. And in my managers module, I'm going to create a new class. It's going to be the game class. So I'm going to say export class game. Okay, so this is a different kind of class. Typically what I would do with the game class or any kind of class, I'd have a constructor and I'd have a bunch of stuff here. But this is going to be a class that I never create. I'm not going to ever instantiate this class. All I'm using it for is a separator. So when I call this bunch of code up, it's going to be like this. Hey, go to my managers.game. And then some property that I want to point to, right? That I can access from anywhere in my code. Like a static, exactly like a static, in fact. So I'm going to make this new thing, public static. And in my public static, in this new object, I'm going to make it as public static. It's going to be called I need a couple of them, but for now, all I need is the asset manager, which is going to be of type create.js.loadQ. Same, I'm kind of duplicating a little bit, right? So this is my asset manager that I want access from anywhere in my code, okay? So far, my asset manager has no reference. It doesn't point to anything, okay? Now, whenever I make a file like this and I want to attach it to my code, I need to make all the attachments in my index.html file. So in my index.html file, right now we have the game scripts area, and I have an objects module with both a label and a button. Now this module, which is a manager's module, should probably come before everything, probably, all right? So I'm probably going to go up here inside my scripts, and I'm going to say script source, and I'm going to say /scripts managers, and it's going to look at my game.ts, my game.js, because it doesn't understand TS. So what happens is when my index.html loads, it actually loads this game.js first. So it becomes available at the top of my code. I'm going to have another thing up here as well. I'm going to have a config file that does other configurations as well. That's also going to be at the top. But for now, we're just building it up. So this one right here is going to just be a file that I have my global variables. This is where all my global variables live, pretty much. One file that has all my global variables. All right, so there's my global variables. All I have right now is one global variable, the global asset manager. That's what this is, right? And I can actually put them in there. So these are globals, right? Now you might say, wait a minute. Why do we have globals at all? We shouldn't have any globals at all. You're right. I could not have globals. But if I don't make these global variables or static objects, I could also use something called singleton pattern to create these singletons that you can access later on. That's one way I can do it as well. But at the end of the day, they're going to be something that have going to be accessed somewhere, right? And it's going to make our lives a whole lot easier but still controllable. It's not going to kill you to have this because it's encapsulated inside of a manager's module inside of the game, right? So think about this as the asset manager instance, the only instance of asset manager in the entire application, okay? So if I go back to, in order for me to use this, I need to set it. So I got to go back to my game.ts in my core folder. And now that I've got a reference to my asset manager, somewhere down here, I'm going to have to make that connection. Okay? So I'm going to do that here. So in my init function, I'm going to say that, well, asset manager is equal to a new createjs.loadQ. And once I've done this, it's a perfect time to say something like this. Managers.game.asset manager then is equal to the asset manager that I just created. So this creates the reference. Right? That's what it does. Create the reference to the global asset manager that I just created. Right? And I'm going to do this a bunch of times in my code coming up, but this is the one way I figured out. It's kind of a hack, if you will. I like to call it a hack, and it's a global, which is also unsafe in some ways, but for now it's going to work. So, yeah, the local variable is something I want to create locally, and then I can. I mean, do I have to do it this way? No, I want to make it so that you can see the connection. That's all I'm doing this here. You can obviously code it differently, but for now, let's leave it like this. So now that I've made my load queue, that's the first thing I do. I'm following the pattern that's up on my API documentation, right? So I made this part first. This has covered this part. So the new load queue. And load queue, all it's going to be is a place. Just think about it as a container that's going to hold all of my assets for bitmaps, right? And for sound in my game. And it's going to preload it when the browser starts. The browser starts, accesses my script, it's going to load up all my assets ahead of time. Sometimes this works out to be, especially if you have a big game with lots of assets, it takes long for the browser to actually show something. And this is where we would put in a loading screen. The loading screen is going to wait until all the assets are loaded. And when it's done, it's going to say, first it's going to say loading. When it's done loading, it's going to bring us to the start screen, right? We're going to do that later on in this course. So this is the first thing. The next thing is I want to install this CreateJS sound plugin, which enables us to load sounds as well. We need this piece. So we're going to say something like this. We're going to say that, well, asset manager dot load plugin. Or is it register plugin? It's install plugin, sorry, install plugin. And we're going to call this new createjs.sound. That basically says, hey, enable sound preloading. That's what this does. Okay, so that enables me, it gives me the ability for me to preload sounds. Otherwise, if I didn't put that in, can't preload sounds. It actually extends the functionality of my preloader. The next part is this part, which I can do it two ways. I can load a file individually like this, or I can use this methodology, which I recommend, where I load a manifest. But I need to have a manifest. It's actually an array of objects. That's what this is. And each object in the array is going to point to the asset that I'm loading. So it looks like this. I need something called the asset manifest. I'm going to say asset manifest is equal to this, some kind of array of objects, right? That's what it is. Except, of course, it's not my image. It's some other image. And the one image that I really want to load right now is inside of my assets, images, click me button. This is the image that I have right now, right? So I go back to that. I want to change my path. This is going to be called the click me button. Click me button. And here my path to the button is going to be here, which I'm going to say something like this, /assets/images, and then click me button dot ping. Okay, so this, what it does is the ID, there's two parts to the object. Notice the object is in curly braces. The first part of the object is the name or the friendly name for the object, which is a string. The second part of the object is the source of where the object is located in my project, which is this. It's a hard-coded source, right? So notice that that's what it is. And now I have my asset manifest. So far, it only has one asset, my click me button. I can have as many assets as I want to preload. The more I load, of course, the longer it's going to take. Okay, that's the first thing. So now that I have my asset manifest, and it's a very simple one right now, I can say that my asset manager wants to load my manifest, and I can point to the asset manifest. Asset manifest. So this loads or preloads. These are the things it's going to preloads all assets listed in the manifest. Okay, that's what this does. So anything that I list here as objects, and by the way, later on what we may do is we make a custom class that is of two types. There's two properties in the class, maybe an interface might be better. One of them is an ID and the other one is a source. And this is going to be a class type asset, the asset class, which we don't have right now. We just have an anonymous class. The anonymous class has two properties, ID and source. Okay, and we can do that in JavaScript because JavaScript is messed up. JavaScript allows you to make objects without classes. Well, actually, it's not messed up. Let me take that back. It's flexible, and it's flexible enough that programmers can hang themselves with it, I like to say. All right, so there's my asset manifest, right? Okay, so I did this. So, but I need an event to detect when my assets are finished loading. And I can say something like this. I can say that, well, hey, asset manager, on complete, so when my assets are finished loading, then call my start function. So this one, call start when assets are finished loading. And why do we have to wait for assets to load? Because what CreateJS does is it uses Ajax, right, to preload all the objects in memory. And Ajax is asynchronous, so we don't know when it's going to finish. And so we want to wait until Ajax finishes loading the assets before we kick off our start. Otherwise, we may load up our assets. We may try and start down here before our assets are finished loading, which means we'll get an error. Okay? So one thing we have to change is on the bottom where the window add event listener. Right now, the window event listener listens for loads, waits for the window to load, and then calls start. We have to change this to init on the bottom. So now, instead of calling start immediately, it calls init. Init initializes and preloads all of our assets, and then from there, it's a pre-process, if you will, a preprocessor that preloads all of our assets, and then calls the start function when it's done. That's what it does. And to check our API documentation, this is exactly what we've done here. Okay? All right, cool. How do I use it? Well, I have to do something like this. I have to say, hey, asset manager, get the result that is the name of my thing that I'm loading, whatever it's called. And I got to use this here anytime I do that. Well, this is why I wanted to make a global. The global keeps track of where my asset manager is. So in any class, I can load my result. So this is done. This is nice. This is this stuff that I've done right here with my init function, but I haven't used it yet. And I have to go into my button class. And instead of loading my button manually, right, which is in my image string right here. So notice in my code where I do this inside of my game.ts file. In my game.ts file, way down where I load my button, which is right here, I specify where I'm getting my button information. But I don't need to do this anymore, right? Because I already have this information. I just have to mention that I want to just access my click me button. Just this part is probably what is good enough because that's the name of my button, click me button. I'll have to change my button class to make this work, right? But right now, all I want to do is ask for my click me button. And of course, that's the friendly name of the button that I gave in my asset manifest. So that's all I'd like to do. But to make this work, I'm going to go into my button class. And instead of getting doing something with my image string like this, passing it to the superclass, I can't just pass it to my superclass because right now it just says click me button. It doesn't mean anything for my superclass. My superclass can take a bunch of things. One of the things it can take is a bitmap, an image or URL. The other one is an object, right? And this is what I want to send it. I want to send my superclass an object, a pre-made object ready to go, a blob, if you will, right? So the way to do that is in here, I can call my asset manager class, the global one. So inside my superclass, I can say something like managers.game.assetmanager.getResult. Sorry, it's long. I'm going to pass in my image string, which is right here, into there. And this is going to be the way I get the asset out of my out of the load. So I load it up, and then I have to get it. So once I load my asset, it's in kind of a binary format, if you will, right? And it sits inside of this blob, right? And the blob is a collection of any asset that I load into it. Okay, this is a very simplified way of saying it, right? But I need to get it somehow. I have to kind of get it out of there, right? And notice I have to go here and go managers.game.assetManager because I'm inside of a class and my asset manager is locked inside of my game class. I can't access it, right? Remember, it's inside of a closure, so I can never access it in there. And that's why the only place I expose it is inside of my game manager class. Okay, so some of you are like looking at me like, I don't get it, right? Well, again, let's think about what I tried to do here. So I'm going to do this one more. I'm going to try and kick this around one more time. So I'm going to bring up my UML diagram. Okay. And star UML, thank you so much for all your help. But I have this new class, right? So what I want to do is my class, I want to kind of draw this out for you. So I have this class right now, and the class that I have is the managers class, right? The managers, I'll call it managers because that's the module. And then I'll call this the game manager, the manager's game class, okay? And the manager's game class, all it has right now, all right, inside of it is something called asset manager, okay? So again, I'm just going to add in a new attribute. And the new attribute is going to be public, and it's also going to be static, okay? And inside of there, we're going to call this asset manager. This is what this looks like. All right, so we have this class hanging out, and it's sitting here, right? And then I have this other class. Like maybe I have something called a button class. So I'm going to make a new class. Here we go. And this is the button class. Class button. And button has different things. It has, you know, as an example, some things about the button, properties, and so on. I'm not going to fill it up here. I just want to use a diagram to kind of illustrate the problem. Okay. I also have this other. We're not going to call it a class, but it's almost like another closure. All right. So this closure here is going to be in the core folder. I have another game class, if you will. Right. So core game. Okay. So. All right, and inside my core game, right, I define a new attribute, right? This attribute, which is private, okay? So instead of, I want you to think about it as a private attribute, and this attribute is called asset manager. Kind of like the same thing, okay? So can button see the asset manager in my core game class? Look, here's my button. Here's my core game class. If my core game class has a private member called asset manager, which it does, then the button has no visibility. It cannot see that asset manager, right? And if I wanted to make this happen, I would have to pass a reference to the asset manager into my button class. And how about if I had a button class, a label class, a game object class, I had a player class, an enemy class, I had something else, and everything required all the assets from the asset manager? That would be horrible. That means every single time I'd have to pass a reference to all these classes, which makes no sense. So I need a singleton, kind of. Not really a singleton. I need an object that holds a reference to the asset manager, and that's the game manager class. So the game manager is going to hold references to a bunch of other items. But right now, it only has one. So the button can make a reference to the asset manager class, which makes it public, right, as an example. And I can access that asset manager, which I get as a reference from my core game. So core game, I make a reference to my manager's class. I make a reference to it. It's almost like it's an association. It's almost like that, where I draw an association line between one or the other, right? This association. I kind of make an association here. It's not a subclass, it's an association, right? And once I've done this, I can access it as a dependency, because that's what really really what it looks like. It's like this becomes a dependency as an example for my button class. All right. And it kind of links anything I assign in my core game class gets assigned as a dependency in other classes. That's what ends up happening. Okay. And that's what I'm showing you here. When I go back to this, you can see that in my game.ts, right? These things here are inside of a closure, this iffy, this immediately invoked function expression, which does not share these things. These are actually, in effect, private members, right? And because they're private, right, you have no visibility of these things outside of the class right now. And so I'm sharing that by making a reference to the asset manager here on line 17. All right, this is all good talk. I did a lot of talking, but let's see if I can make it work. That's another thing. So first I want to save my button class. So save it. And then if I go back to my code, or sorry, my project, if I go here, I should see my button now immediately. And also, one thing I should also see in my inspector, if I go here, is there should be no error, right? If I click on my button now, I should get clicked. So it works, and all my code for it works. And it's always going to work like this for everything I preload. This is an important piece. I need to preload my assets so that they're always available to me in any of the classes I make.
So for me, it's saying that manages is not defined, so it's not an object.
You have to connect it to your index.html. Did you do that? Yeah. Let me push it up on GitHub, and then you'll see it. So okay, so now I did that. I created a asset manager class. And I preloaded. So I'm using preloading, and I created an asset manager. So I'm gonna go here, and notice on the left there's a friendly GitHub link that I can do here locally. I can also use my command line, right? So let's just do it without the command line today, right? So I'm over here. Notice these are all the files I changed, right? But remember that the way we set up TypeScript right now, every time I make a new file, I actually make two more. I make a JS file and I make a map file. The map file that gets created automatically when I transpile helps me do debugging. That's what it's for, right? And the JS file is the only thing that browsers were going to read. Okay, so I make a change to my TS file, then the JS file and the JS map file get changed or created. All right, so what did I do? I added preloading support, right? And the asset manager object, or global object, I'll say, is what this thing is, global object, right? And I'm going to click this, this one here. It basically does git add dot, so this little plus. And then when I check this, after I type a comment, I check this. It's like git commit -m, and then whatever I put in there, right? So now that I've made my my add and my commit, I can push it to GitHub by going to the ellipses and going push, and that'll push the branch master has no upstream branch. Oh, that's interesting. Sure, publish it. Let's see what crazy stuff happens. All right, let's see how that changed my Git repo. I shouldn't have changed anything, but maybe I made a mistake. Yeah, we're good now. Yay. All right, so this is where we sit inside of our, this is lesson 3. So if you're going to download and if you're watching the video remotely, this is where we're at right now. And if you notice my commits, that's the last thing I did, which is adding preloading support. Okay. Are you with me? And does anyone have any questions with this one? Because sometimes people don't understand why I did the things I did. Not because they follow along, they copy my code, and then they're like, okay, but I don't get it, right? So again, think about this, right? We want to be able to measure something. This is the problem. We have to be able to measure something over here that has never been loaded yet. You're trying to measure an unknown quantity. You're going to get a not a number error, a nan error in JavaScript. What are you trying to measure? I don't know what this is. Not a number or undefined, right? It's going to cause an error. However, if I preload like I did here and get the result, and I return the result from my superclass, right, constructor, then I have something. I have it's in the browser cache already. That's what this thing does. It puts the new object in my browser cache. And now that I can do that, I can measure it because it's there. It's physically an object that I've preloaded in my cache, right? And if I can measure it, I can align it like I'm doing here. I can make it centered or not centered, right? And I can position it. Yeah, those are the things there. So please try that out, and hopefully that'll work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, please check my code on GitHub and compare my code with your code. Okay. Now that we're clear about that, this is a great place to start adding additional assets. And I want to make an example game, and I've done it before in game programming 1. So people who took COMP305 earlier with me, and I know some people are taking this course a little bit out of sequence, like Pedro as an example. He took COMP305 with me first, and then he's doing this course, right? Some people are going to take this course, and then they're doing COMP305, or they're doing it at the same time, all right? Are you doing it at the same time? So this is kind of weird. So in my version of COMP305, when I teach it, I have a little example project called Mail Pilot, right? Actually, Gerardo, he did Mail Pilot in COMP305, yeah? Yeah. So I'm going to do the same simple project in here. And this is kind of like my Hello World project. That's what it is, to help me demonstrate how to create a simple game in Create.js, okay? So the first thing I need is some assets. And if you go up online, I can probably get you some assets. I probably have them somewhere else too, but I can find them always on GitHub. I always have my assets, kind of copies of my old assets on GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub again. And I might have them under my own GitHub. So if I find a repository called MP Assets, maybe it's there. Maybe it's not. Let's see. Sorry. There's only 2 places I have it. So give me a second. It'll probably be on Centennial as well. Let's look at my repositories. These crazy 66 MP. Nope. So let's try Centennial. That's why I kind of went out of there and go back to Centennial. And I think under Centennial College, there is a repository called MP Assets. There it is. So MP Assets, again, I've been using this repository for both COMP305 and 397. That's why it doesn't have a name for it. I'm just going to download this thing. So download the zip file for it. Yay. And this is inside my downloads folder. There's MP Assets, which looks like I already had. And I'm going to extract it all. So I'm going to say, I'm going to use 7-zip to extract to this. Sure. Doesn't matter where it is, which is way probably at the bottom. There it is. Inside there, I have a couple of assets. I have an assets folder, an audio folder, a fonts folder, and a sprites folder. So I'm going to take these 3 folders. I'm going to copy them. And so just wait for a second, guys. And I'm going to go to, unless you want to do it yourself. And then I'm going to go to my files inside lesson 3, inside of my assets. And notice that I have images. I'm just going to paste this part. All right. And I also have this thing called sprites. And these sprites right now, I'm going to actually take these sprites. I'm going to cut them. And I'm going to put them inside my images folder. I did this on purpose before. And I'm going to get rid of sprites because I don't need them right now. I'll go back to that in a second. So now I have audio, fonts, and images. That's what I have. I want to rename these so they're lowercase because, again, this is for another project. So we'll say fonts and audio. Sometimes people call it sounds as well. But those are the 3 folders I have right now. And so in my project, the great thing about Visual Studio Code is it now has all that stuff. It includes it automatically. When I do something in my operating system, then VS Code puts everything in here in my project. Okay? Yay.
No fonts right now?
No, I put them all. I put audio, fonts, and images. No sprites. And I copy the sprite stuff into my images folder, right? So now I have made 11 changes, right? So these are the stuff I added in. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go kind of add these all in like I did before. And I'm going to say added Mail Pilot assets project. That's what I've done. So I'm going to check this check mark. It won't give me that error anymore. I'll just click push. And then good, we're good. So now going back to our project, you can update yourself by putting my latest version, or you can download MP assets for yourself. All right, cool. So I've got my project. This is where it is right now. And I've got some simple assets. Some of them are very exciting. Here's my cloud. That's my very exciting cloud. I've got my very exciting plane, which reminds you of planes from somewhere else, 1942. And I also have an island, 1942, as well as some other things, an ocean background right here. And for those people doing my assets course, this is a good example of a background that I'm going to scroll and loop over and over again. I'm going to show you how to do that in the assets course. All right, so cool. So I've got some assets, but now I need to start making my game. Okay, notice that I need to start making some assets. I want to make my game go. So my game is going to be about this airplane. It's going to be a top-down scrolling game, and I'm going to be able to move my airplane for now with my mouse only, left and right. That's what I'm going to be able to do. And it's going to avoid the clouds. And when it kind of rolls over the islands, I get points. All right. Again, this is my Hello World project. And why? If you know how to do it in one place, you can do it in other places. I've done this project on Unity, Unreal. I've done it on iOS. I've done it on Android. Every place I do it, and it just basically, I understand afterwards how the system works. So I recommend something like this for you. It's not an exciting project. It's just like my Hello World. That's all it is. Okay. All right. So how do I use it? Well, first of all, I've started this project off in different ways. Right now, what I want to do is I want to make my plane, my main player. Remember, maybe I have my first playable due in a couple of weeks. Let's suppose my mail pilot game is my game, right? And my first playable is due when? Week 5, right? Right now we're sitting at week 3, and I want to make my player move around. All right, and I want to use my mouse for that. Okay. So one thing I need a player object. That's what I need. I need a player class. Okay, I need to instantiate my player class. Okay, that's the second thing I need to do. And then I need to be able to move my player around based on my mouse. Okay. So let's go back to my scripts. In my scripts, my player class should probably be in my objects folder, right? So let's go to my objects folder right now. In my objects folder, I'm making a new file. I'm going to call this file player.ts. And I'm going to do the same pattern that I've been using this whole time. Now, this is slightly different than what I've done the last time I recorded this course, which is about a couple of semesters ago. I actually did it the reverse way, where I created my finite state machine first, and then I made my player and everything else. Here, I'm going to go back to the old way, and I'm doing this because there's more gamers in this course than last time. Last time I had more non-gamers. There was people from other places, so I kind of went a little quicker, okay? Which is kind of counterintuitive. You'd think I'd go slower, but actually I had to go quicker because otherwise they couldn't get their game going. All right, so I'm going to make module. It's going to be called objects like before. That's not going to change. And in my objects module, I'm going to make a new class that I'm going to export called player, right? I could also call this class plane, which I've done in the past, the plane class. But actually, this is the player class, okay, in this particular version of my game object, okay? Or my game engine. I'm going to have some private instance variables, for sure. I'm also going to have some public properties, maybe some constructors, one or more, most likely just one. I'm going to have some private methods, and maybe, what the heck? Maybe some public methods. That was weird. All right, so those are, I always try to outline my classes like this. Every time you watch this video, you're going to see me doing this over and over again. This is almost like my outline of what my class is going to look like. It's not really quite pseudocode. It's just an outline. All right, so, wow. Okay, so I need a constructor. Okay, so here's my constructor. And what my constructor is going to do is it's going to load part of my player. And the other thing I want to think about is this. What type of class is my player class? Should it be its own class? Or maybe I got to inherit from something. So there's a couple of approaches here. If I inherit, I'm using inheritance. And I could make it a bitmap right now. because my player would be a bitmap object, right? And I could extend the bitmap and make it player. Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. The other way I could do it is I could think about my player as an actor, right? And the actor, it uses the bitmap as something that it displays on the screen. Okay, a little bit more, a more complex way of doing things. I'm going to make this, I'm going to inherit from bitmap for now. So I'm going to go to bitmap. I'm going to say that my player is of type createjs.bitmap. And when I do that, my constructor demands that I pass in a super constructor, a call to my super constructor. And my super constructor has got to have the name of the bitmap that I'm loading. Wait a minute. I never loaded a bitmap for my player. In fact, I didn't do any preloading. Let's go back and fix that in my core game.ts file. I only have this one piece, this only thing that I'm loading, which is my click me button. And that doesn't make any sense either. It shouldn't be a click me button. It should be a start button if I'm going to go there at all. All right, but for now, I'm going to wipe out the start button. I'm going to start the game immediately. I'm going to have one screen that I start with, and that's going to be my mail pilot screen, my game screen. Okay? So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to still preload this for now, right? But I'm going to make some copy and pasting things here. So I'm going to say copy and paste. And then what I want to do is I want to go through my assets and start preloading some of this stuff. Okay, so in my images, I want to get my plane. There's my plane. And it's going to be in assets, images, plane.png. Plane. There, I've preloaded it now. Right? Once I list it in my manifest, because my init function is already set up, it's going to preload any asset that I list here. Okay? Nice and easy. Let's load up the other ones because I know I'm going to need them. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to load up my my cloud and my island and my ocean. So cloud, island, ocean. We'll call this cloud. Doesn't matter which order, by the way. Cloud, and this will be the cloud.png, and my island, which would be my island.png. And if I want to, I can have a GIF image instead of a PNG, right, to load. So my ocean doesn't even have to be a type PNG. It can be something else because the preloader can take a lot of different kinds of files. So let's just leave it like that. So ocean, and this is going to be my ocean.gif, ocean.gif, which is a different format. Great, so I've loaded all that stuff. And if I want to, I can also load sounds the same way. I have a few sounds: my engine sound, my thunder sound, and my yay sound when I pass over my island. Let's load those up too. Why not? So the way this works is I say, well, the name of the sound, so engine sound, usually engine sound. I usually put sound to indicate that as a sound. Assets, instead of images, it's audio. And instead of engine.png, it's engine.og. Og stands for og vorbis, which is an open source file format for sound files. You could also use MP3s as well as WAV files if you want. I have two more sounds. I have the thunder sound, which is of, it says just thunder, as well as my yay sound. Yay sound, which is yay. Okay, so I've loaded all my sounds and my images and everything else, and now I want to use it inside of my player class. So if I go back to my player class, which is way down here, you can see that it's waiting for something that I want to load, and of course I need to make a reference to my asset manager. I don't have to pass in what I'm loading here because my player is always going to load my plane as its bitmap. Okay? So I can say that managers.game.assetManager.getResults, and I'm going to put in the friendly name for my asset, which is called plane. That's what I named it. Okay, so that loads it up and sends it into my superclass. Now, okay, so it tells me there's an error, right? And I've tried to put this in there. That's the way I would do it in Swift or in C++, but actually I need to use the extends keyword. Okay, there we go. I remember the right syntax of this language. All right, so now this is good. So I've loaded up my plane. Yay. Okay, I've done that. But I need to be able to have a couple of additional things for my plane class. One thing is I want some kind of start method. So this is a public method. By the way, you'll notice a pattern, start, which returns void. And I also want a public update method, which also returns void. I have a start and update method. Yay. Fantastic. I'm going to have some private instance variables in here. I want to have width, height, half width, and half height. G, what does that look like? It looks like some other things I've made for label and button, right? Hey, I'm duplicating. Whenever I'm duplicating, you know, I got to go back to that principle, that object-oriented programming principle, which is dry. Do not repeat yourself. Do not repeat yourself. And I'm repeating myself, which means there's a call for a superclass of some kind of abstract class, something. For now, though, I'm going to not do that. I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm going to copy all this stuff right here, this whole first part here. I'm going to copy this all again, this part. And that means both my private instance variables and my public properties are going to be identical to button. When I do identical to button, and if I say that to myself, that means something is programmed wrong, right? I should never do the same thing, copy paste again and again. I'm doing it because I'm building up with you. I'm building up with you. I'm not going to go from 0 to hero with you right away. First, I want to make something work, and then I'm going to go back and refine and refactor, okay? Some kind of game object maybe, or something else, right? But we got to think about this thing, because game objects are all different kinds of game object. You can say that there's a game object, but there's different kinds. There's an actor. That's a game object. There's also a non-actor, like, for example, a platform. That's not an actor, right? And also a button. That's also could be a game object, but it's not an actor. It doesn't actually do anything in the game, like a player or an enemy, right? So I got to think about that. All right, so I've got my player. It does all this stuff, and I can measure my width and my height, and great. And what I want to do in here is almost exactly what I've done with a button. Uh-oh, I'm even duplicating that part. So I'm going back into get bounds, and I'm getting this as center stuff, and this X and this Y. But I don't want to do this part, and it's not is centered. It's always centered. All my game objects are centered. So I'm going to get some of this code from my button class and go back into my player class. And in my constructor function, right, as an example, I'm going to call my start function. So this is where my start function is going to be called. And what I want to do is, inside my start function, I'm going to do all of my initialization in my start function, like right here, which makes sense. That's a different pattern. And I don't care about is centered, because it's always going to be is centered. My buttons, my button might be centered, might not be, but my player objects, any object that I run around with the screen with, should always be centered. So this stuff here, these 4 lines, should always be part of my game object, yeah? So I know that my width and my height, what they are for the object, and I also know my regex and regy is, I'm going to recenter my pivot for my object. That's what these 2 lines do. They recenter the pivot, the center point for my entire object, to the center of my object after I've measured it. I measure it, and then I center it. Cool. So that's what the start method does. Okay, in my update method, which I'm going to call every frame inside my main game loop, right, in my update method, what I want to do here is I want to follow my X value for my mouse. But I also want to set up a default Y value for my plane. So my Y value, and guys, please, and girls, please forgive me. I've done this like lots of times. So the Y value is going to be 435 pixels. God, I'm just guessing there, right? Because my screen is 640 by 480. I've done this a bunch of times. 435 pixels. It's just an arbitrary random value, right? Of course it's not. I know exactly where it's going to go. I've done this too many times, right? So that's one. And yeah, we're going to deal with this later on. Pedro looked at me like, come on, how did you know that? And the reason why I know that is because,
how did you know that?
it's hard-coded. It's a hard-coded value. But I know this is going to work. And remember, I just want to make this thing work right now. All I want to do is make my plane move around the screen. That's all I want. So what this is going to do is going to keep my plane, the y value of my plane, the exact same. And it's not going to change. I'm only going to change my x value. The horizontal value is going to change, right? So I'm going to say something like, well, this dot x then is equal to, oh, man, I need a mouse. I need to get my mouse. Look, I got to get my mouse from my stage. But is my stage available inside of my button class? No. My stage is defined inside of my game object. Remember? Let's go back to that star UML. In my game object, I have my asset manager, but I also define a private value, another attribute called stage, right? Stage. And this stage is a private value. It's private. So guess what I got to do? If I'm going to share my stage and different aspects of my stage, and I will, I'm going to probably need it in my game manager's class. So I'm going to make a new attribute that's public and static, and it's going to be called stage. So this stage is the global stage that I'm going to access, the global stage. I need to have access to that in my entire game, okay? So going back to the drawing board, I need to go back into my manager's file, into my game.ts, and inside, next to where I have my asset manager, I need to make another object, public static. It's going to be called stage, and it's going to be of type create.js.stage with a capital S. And now that I did this, I've listed it is inside my global functions. These are all my globals. I need to connect it by going back into my game.ts file inside of my core. So in my core, I got to scroll all the way down, right, where it says when I define my stage, which is right here on line 33, and I got to make a reference to the stage from a global perspective. I'm going to say managers.game.stage. Is this the only way to do it? Absolutely not. You can do it other ways. But I'm doing it this way for ease of use for now. And I have these global functions or global objects that I can use anywhere right now, so I don't have to pass my stage over and over again. So again, I'm passing a reference to the stage globally. That's what I'm doing. So I can have reference to the stage object. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to go back to my player class, and inside this area here where I say this.x, so I want to get my x value for my mouse, I can say that managers.game.stage.mouse, and I can get my mouse x position from there. Mouse x is what I'm going to get for the x value. So whenever I move my mouse on the stage, anywhere, it's going to detect and send a signal from the stage to this x, and it's going to fill in the value of x from wherever my mouse is. So it's going to follow my mouse. That's what this thing does, okay? Wonderful. I think for now, I finished my simple, quote unquote, player class, right? My simple player class. And I have to attach it to my index.html, because if I don't do this, my code will not know about it, right? So notice for now, I have my game in my manager's class. I have my label and my button. And before I make my core game, I should probably load up my player. So I'm going to say, so scripts, source, script, source, sorry, slash scripts, slash scripts, slash objects, and then player.js. So now that it's loaded on, now that it's loaded here, I can use him. I can use my player because I've loaded it. Okay, how do I use him though? Well, first, I made some changes. And this is a great place to put it up on GitHub because I don't know if it's going to work, and I want to share it with you. So this is good. So I'm going to put it up on GitHub. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say added player class. Okay, so I'm going to kind of add all these and click this button and go to the ellipses and push. And now you guys should have my player class the way I've written it in a second. There we go. All right, so great. But we never used my player yet. So I'm going to go to my game.ts file. And you know what? Down in the main right here, where I have my hello label and my click me button and my click me button stuff, I don't need a button. I don't need anything. I'm just going to make my player run around the screen. So let's get rid of my button and my label for now. Right? I don't need this stuff. In fact, why am I even loading my click me button? Because I don't need to. So I'll just get rid of that. In fact, I don't need my click me button or my hello label object from here, so I'll get rid of those. I'm not going to use those, right? In fact, I don't need to update anything down here. So for me, that's my main is now clear, right? And I'm going to start my game. My first part of my game is I have to instantiate an object of type player. So first, I should make another field. I'm going to say I'll call this game objects. For now, that's what I'll call them. And I'll let a new player object be of type objects.player. Okay, so there's my objects.player object. And then down in here, inside of my main, I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say that I'm going to instantiate. Now, by the way, we're going to modify this heavily, right? Because next time we get together, because now we're sitting at 7:10, and I just want to make my player move around. Next time we get together, I want to talk about finite state machines and so on, because I don't think I'll be able to have time today. We ran a little bit over with the presentations. Everything that I put in here, I'm going to modify or move around in my new scene that I'm going to make. But for now, this is just a test scene that I'm creating with my player moving around, okay? So how do I do this? I'm going to say that, first of all, I'm going to say that player is equal to a new objects.player. First thing. I instantiate a new object of type player, all right? And then I need to add it to the scene, right, to the stage. So I'm going to say that stage.addChild player. Now this adds the player at 435, so y is equal to 435, and x is going to be where my mouse is. That's what it does, just by doing these two things. However, I need to update my player every frame in my update function so that it moves around. So inside my update function for now, I want to say that player.update. I'm going to call the update function that I built into my player class. Okay, so my update function, it triggers every frame. That's what it does. It calls this, remember I have my ticker, and 60 times per second, it calls this player class. Now, all right, cool. This is a great place to check to see if it's even working. So let's go back to my code. Here's my example, and oh man, what the heck? It's even showing my click thing. It's like I'm broken. Why is that? Well, you know, I can always tell because if it's not connected, I got this really weird error. It says here, right? My watcher task. My watcher task actually failed, right? It says reloading browser, and it says my error. I'm just going to stop this task for now, right? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear the screen and write my light server again and see if it actually triggers. Oh, cool. There's my plane. And notice that wherever my plane is, wherever my mouse goes, my plane goes, right? Do you have this with me?
Yes.
All right. So if you did this part, this is the first part of the movement for my player. Notice that if I move up here, because I don't change my Y position, it's all it's going to change is my X position, right and left, right? However, I have a problem. Okay. And my problem is if I want to cheat, right, I can do this, right, where my player is kind of half off the screen, right? And I can kind of do that if I off the screen if I do this too, right? I don't want to be able to do that. I want to stop my player from moving off the screen. And so I need to use a new function called checkbounds. All right, so how do I do that? So I'm going to go back to the drawing board with my player. So let's go to my player. And what I want to do here is, okay, this is cool, right? But what I want to check to see is if my X value is greater than the screen width, or my X value is less than the screen width, then I want to reset it. I want to reset my player back to where it's supposed to be. I'm going to hard code this for now, Pedro, but I'm going to go back later on and create configuration files to eliminate these things. All right, so what I want to say is if this dot x is greater than or equal to, actually greater than, that's what I want to say. So if I want to say it's greater than 640 pixels, that means if it's greater, but it's not the whole width, right? It's almost like this is greater than 640, minus half the width of my player, right? So 640 is the total width of my screen, my play area, but my player is some value. For example, let's say somehow I know that the player is 65 pixels wide. By the way, I know the player is 65 pixels wide, right? Only because I've done this too many times, right? And let's suppose the player is 65 pixels wide. That means half of the player's width is 32.5 pixels, somehow 0.5. The width, I have a width, right? So I know then that I want to pull back if it's greater than not just my whole width, but I want to pull back from the right? So it's not the middle position. It's the middle position minus the half the width, right? That's what I want. But I also want to add on the other side, right? So what I want to say is if this dot x is greater than 640 minus this dot half width, right? If it's greater than that, then what I want is for this dot x to be equal to 640 minus this dot half width. What I'm doing is I'm setting a hard value for the right side. So what this does is checks the right boundary. That's what it does. Checks the right boundary to make sure I can't go off screen, and then it resets it back. Let's test this part. So just the right boundary. I'm going to go back to this, and can I go back? No. See, it stops me from going outside the boundary now. I can't go this way, and I want to go on this way too. So how do I do that part? So I'm going to say that check the left boundary. How do I do that? I'm going to say that if this dot x is less than what? It can't be less than 0, but it's less than half width. Half the width of my plane, right, is less than this dot half width, right? That's, by the way, that's why I need half widths. I knew ahead of time, and that's why I made those things. If it's less than half width, then what I want to say is that this dot x is equal to this dot half width, and that would solve it. Because remember, this dot half width is 32.5 pixels, which means it's going to go to the right. It's going to actually push my plane to the right, a positive value. So if I try this out and I go back, and now I can't go less than this, and I can't go more than that. So now my plane can't cheat anymore. It's inside this area. Are we good? I know it's pretty simple, right? And later on, we're going to take away the mouse controls, and we're going to add in 2 types of controls. I'm going to add in a keyboard control, just so Pedro's happy, as well as gamepad controls. So you can use twin stick if you really want to. We're going to do that later on. Not right away, right? For your first playable, it's okay if you use a mouse or keyboard controls, if you can figure those out. I'm okay with that. And hopefully I'll talk about other kinds of controls before week 5, like maybe next week. All right, so we've added this in, and we've kind of run out of time, right? But it's pretty much the same class, but I have a problem. I'm replicating all of this stuff over and over again, and it's driving me insane. And I'm going to do it again for my enemy, and again for my island, and again for everything else. And I will have a lot of code bloat. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until the code explodes, right? Okay, I'm just joking, but it's going to be really big and really inefficient, and I don't want to do that. And so what I want to do is create some kind of game object that everything that I make inherits from. For now, we'll make a generic game object that everything inherits from. Later, we might split the game object into 2 types, actor and non-actor. Okay, so I'm going to go to game object or managers or objects. I'm going to make a new object called game object. So new file. I'm going to call this object game object. All right, game object. Well, what is this thing, this game object? So what is this going to be? This is going to be, I'm going to point to the same stuff so that everything has the same pattern, right? So I'm going to say something like, well, I'm going to use module objects. And did I call this just game object? What did I call this thing? Let's rename this thing. Rename. Game object. I got so excited. .ts. So yeah, so I'm going to have my module called objects. I'm going to have an export a class. What kind of class should game object be, guys? You guys are object-oriented people. Should it be a concrete class or should it be an abstract class? Abstract, because I'm never going to inherit from it. I'm sorry, I'm never going to instantiate an object directly from game object. So I'm going to export my abstract class. You can do that, called game object, which extends, for now, createjs.bitmap. Anything that extends, anything that uses bitmap as its superclass, I can replace now with game object. Okay, and I need to do a couple things. I need to make private instance variables. I need to make public properties. I also need some constructor function, and as well as some private methods, maybe, and maybe some public methods. Well, I have a blueprint for this because I've done it with my game. So I'm going to go to my player, right? And I'm going to grab all this stuff, in fact, everything inside the player, including the update for now, because we're going to replace it. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back into my game object, and I'm going to just replace all this stuff. All right. So what can I keep and what can I discard? So does a game object need width, height, half width, and half height? Yes, it does that, right? Cool. Width and height and blah, blah, and whatever. Okay, but this part, that's no good, right? I need to pass in a reference to the image path right in here into my constructor. So my constructor, this is the first change. I'm going to pass in something called image path, image string, which is going to be of type string. That's what it is. And I'm going to pass the image string into my get result, my asset manager class. So it's going to be called image string. Okay, so that's what something's going to change, right? I'm going to call the start method. Should I? I don't think so. I don't think I should call the start method immediately. I got to rejig the start method anyway. I could start it. I could call this the way it is, right? But what I really want to do in my class is what I really want to do, this is always going to be the same. This stuff here, width, height, regex, and reg-y. I'm always going to have this piece in there, right? Well, maybe. Not for my button. So that is going to be different every time, right? It's almost like I need my own start method, and I need to override what's inside of the update method. But I want the start and update, because then I can call whatever the game object is called, .start, whatever the game object is called, .update. Okay? So I need the start and the update. And you know what? I'm going to also include some other methods that I know I need, right? Because I know from past experience. I need a reset method, which we are going to define later. I'm also going to have a destroy method at the bottom, so I can destroy my object. So destroy. And maybe make it a method. That would be good. All right, so I need these things, right? These are reset, start, update, and destroy. I also do want to be able to initialize certain things, but not everything. So instead of calling start, I'm going to make a private method, right, that only the superclass accesses. So private, and I'm going to call this method initialize, which is going to be something that only the superclass can access, which is going to return void. And I'm going to call this method in my constructor, this._initialize. So the initialize method is going to initialize any common variables that I'm going to use in every other class, right? So I don't have to do that in my start method. So I know that in my player class, sorry, I'm going a little fast right now, but only because I'm running out of time. In my player class, I know I'm going to initialize these two things. So I can copy these two and put it inside my initialize function, but not these ones. oops, back into my game object. So these ones are always going to be true, right? I'm always going to initialize bounds, width and height, always, right? So that way I can, any other thing I want to initialize, I want to put in there, okay? And I'm going to update this GameObject class later on, again and again, as I continue going, okay? Reset, start, update, and destroy, stay empty. I don't have to modify those. Those are just a pattern, right, that I'm going to have. Now in my, now that I have my game object defined, I need to add it to my project. So in my project, now think about this. It should come before label, button, and player, and after my managers. All right, so it should be here. Order is important, unfortunately. Because if you don't load it in the right order, it's going to say, I don't know what you mean. What object are you talking about? And so this is the GameObject.ts object. Cool, now that I've loaded it in, right, I need to use it. But before that, I'm going to put it up on GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub. These are the things I changed. I'm going to say added GameObject SuperClass, right? And I'm going to just add all this, git add dot. That's what this does. And then what? And then I'm going to click this, git commit -m, add a game object, and then push. I'm going to push this to GitHub. Okay, great. I have everything up on GitHub, so you have my code, just in case I was too fast. And then I'm going to go here, and in my player, I want to test it for the first time, only for my player. What do I do to make my player inherit from my game object? Yes. Instead of extends create.js bitmap, the first thing I'm going to do is my player extends objects.gameObject, right? A new thing. All right, well, this is giving me an error, and for a couple of reasons. One, do I need all this stuff now? No. So I can get rid of all this. And this is interesting. I can get rid of all this. All this stuff. Because it's already been defined in my GameObject SuperClass. I don't need it anymore. It becomes a much slimmer class. How about this? This isn't what I need. I need just the word plain, because that's what I'm passing in to my GameObject SuperClass. So that goes away. Do I need start? Yes. Do I need this part? No. But I do need this part, because that part is not the same for every game object. For example, in my button game object, I decide if it's first, if regex and reg-y is unique. All right, so this is good. I've fixed up my player, but now I have to modify my player in my game.ts file in my core script, because I define my player up here as an objects.player. Wait, that's fine. Objects.player. It's still an objects.player. It's just that objects.player inherits from my objects.gameObject. So there's no changes necessary here. This is the same. Well, let's test it. So I make sure that everything is saved. I'm going to go back out to here, and yay! This is using my new GameObject SuperClass. If it wasn't working, then inside of here in my inspector, I would have an error in my console like this, right? So let's see what this says, actually. This is another problem. It says that, oh, yeah, this is cool. It did this, but I actually typed in assets, images, clowned, right? Not cloud. I made a spelling error. So going back, this is good. I didn't even test that before. That was a bug. I'm squashing bugs, too. And no, it's not, there's no clowned. It's wrong. It's spelled wrong. It's cloud. Right? And if I save that and go back, you can see now that there's no issues, right? No problems. All right, cool. So this is really good. I've got my stuff working, and it's working on with my new class. I'm going to say I implemented, I basically updated the player class to work with GameObject, right? That's what I did. Oh. And, oh yeah, I better add all these to the staging area and go from here and from there and push. Here we go. All right, so that really is what I wanted to do in a nutshell today. I know if I had more time, I would have gone further, and I would have also converted my button. You can try it at home if you want to on your own. So you can convert your button by yourself to a game object, objects.gameObject, but next week I'll do it anyway, right? I'll just go through it. But try it out. Here's a challenge for you. Go into your button class and modify your button class as a challenge to the new objects.gameObject, to inherit from that, as opposed to inherit from createjs.bitmap. Because then we're going to cut even more code out, but we're not going to duplicate so much code. Okay? And what about label? Can we do anything with label? The answer is right now we cannot, because label inherits from createjs.text. It's a totally different kind of object, and so we cannot make it a type of game object right now. In the future, maybe, when it's a non-actor, when I do something else with it. And then we can even cut our code down even more. Okay, so far so good. We've got this going. I'm going to stop recording now, and then I'm going to make our little first peer review that I'm going to put up right now for you guys to answer, and that's due tonight at midnight. Okay? Guys, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll get together next week again, and we'll do more. I'll get you guys going on more stuff that we're going to add into our game engine. Okay? Thanks so much.